For many people who hate making the bed, the act represents an unnecessary surrender of personal autonomy. The bed is often one of the few spaces that feels entirely private, untouched by external expectations or social rules. When someone refuses to make their bed, it can be a quiet assertion of control over their own environment, especially in lives filled with obligations, deadlines, and constant demands from others. This resistance can also stem from early experiences where making the bed was enforced rather than chosen. Being told daily that an unmade bed was a sign of laziness or failure may cause the task to become emotionally charged. As adults, avoiding it can be a subconscious rejection of authority, a way of reclaiming independence from rules that once felt oppressive. People who value freedom over structure often see no inherent benefit in making the bed if it will be undone again later. From their perspective, the task feels symbolic rather than practical. They may prioritize actions that produce lasting or meaningful results, viewing bedmaking as performative rather than functional. There is also a strong connection between autonomy and authenticity. An unmade bed may feel more honest, reflecting the reality of how life is actually lived rather than how it is supposed to appear. For these individuals, making the bed can feel like pretending, creating an image that does not align with their internal state or values. Some people associate a neatly made bed with external judgment rather than personal comfort. They may feel that the practice exists to satisfy societal standards rather than individual needs. Rejecting it becomes a way to live more on their own terms, free from invisible observers and expectations. This mindset often aligns with a broader resistance to micromanagement. People who dislike making the bed may also dislike rigid schedules or overly detailed rules. They tend to thrive when given flexibility and trust, preferring to organize their lives according to internal motivation rather than imposed routines. In this sense, the unmade bed can be seen as a daily reminder that life does not need to be perfectly ordered to be meaningful. It represents acceptance of imperfection and a willingness to prioritize lived experience over aesthetic ideals. For some, this approach brings a sense of relief rather than chaos. The act of not making the bed can also serve as a small but powerful boundary. It signals that not every aspect of life is open for evaluation or critique. This boundary can be especially important for individuals who feel constantly scrutinized in other areas of their lives. Psychologically, this behavior may be less about laziness and more about self-definition. It reflects a choice, conscious or unconscious, to define one's identity outside conventional markers of discipline or success. The unmade bed becomes part of a personal philosophy rather than a simple habit. Ultimately, for people driven by autonomy, hating bedmaking is not about disorder. It is about choosing freedom over ritual and valuing self-directed living over compliance with norms that feel arbitrary. Many people who hate making the bed possess a cognitive style that prioritizes creativity and abstract thinking over routine maintenance tasks. Their minds are often occupied with ideas, plans, or emotional processing, leaving little mental space for activities they perceive as mundane. Making the bed simply does not compete well for their attention. For creative thinkers, repetitive tasks can feel draining rather than grounding. The mental energy required to focus on small details may feel wasted when their thoughts are already racing toward larger concepts. In this context, avoiding bedmaking is less about neglect and more about conserving cognitive resources. These individuals often experience their environment differently. A perfectly ordered space may feel sterile or restrictive, while a slightly chaotic one feels alive and stimulating. An unmade bed can signal comfort and creative potential rather than disorder. There is also evidence that creative minds tend to resist rigid routines. While structure can be helpful, too much of it may stifle spontaneous thought. People who hate making the bed may unconsciously avoid it because it represents an unnecessary constraint on their mental flow. Mental fatigue plays a significant role as well. For people who spend their days making decisions, solving problems, or managing emotions, small tasks can feel disproportionately exhausting. The bed becomes one more demand in a long list, even if it appears simple from the outside. Some individuals associate the bed primarily with rest and recovery. Altering it immediately after waking may feel disruptive, as if the space has not yet completed its purpose. Leaving it unmade allows the room to transition more slowly from rest to activity. There is also a psychological comfort in visual reminders of humanity and imperfection. An unmade bed can feel warm and inviting, reinforcing a sense of safety and familiarity. For people sensitive to emotional atmospheres, this can be more important than visual order. People who think in nonlinear ways often organize their lives according to internal logic rather than external appearance. They may know exactly where things are, even if it looks messy to others. In this framework, making the bed adds no functional value. This mindset can sometimes be misunderstood as irresponsibility, but it often coexists with high levels of intelligence and creativity. The dislike of bed-making reflects a prioritization of meaning, inspiration, and emotional resonance over symbolic cleanliness. In the end, for these individuals, the unmade bed is not a failure of discipline. It is a byproduct of a mind oriented toward ideas, emotions, and imagination rather than routine tasks. For some people, hating to make the bed is deeply connected to emotional states such as stress, anxiety, or low mood. When emotional energy is depleted, even simple tasks can feel overwhelming. The bed, rather than being a neutral object, becomes tied to emotional exhaustion. During periods of stress, the bed often represents escape and comfort. Making it may feel like closing off a safe space too quickly, forcing a transition into responsibility before the person feels ready. Leaving it unmade can be a form of self-soothing. There are also individuals who associate bed-making with pressure to be productive. In cultures that glorify constant achievement, small rituals can take on symbolic weight. For someone already feeling inadequate or overwhelmed, making the bed may feel like another metric they could fail. Depression and burnout can significantly affect motivation. In these states, tasks that lack immediate emotional payoff are often avoided. Making the bed may not provide enough psychological reward to justify the effort when energy is limited. Some people experience a sense of guilt or shame around cleanliness due to past criticism. Ironically, this can lead to avoidance rather than compliance. The bed becomes a reminder of judgment, making the act emotionally uncomfortable rather than neutral. There is also a link between emotional authenticity and environment. For individuals who value honesty in their emotional expression, an unmade bed can reflect how they truly feel. Forcing order when they feel internally chaotic may feel invalidating. In moments of emotional vulnerability, maintaining appearances can feel exhausting. Choosing not to make the bed becomes a small act of self-compassion, allowing rest without added expectations. This choice can support mental well-being rather than undermine it. Some people find that strict routines increase anxiety rather than reduce it. The pressure to perform tasks in a certain way or at a certain time can heighten stress. Rejecting bed-making can be a way to reduce this pressure. Over time, people may develop personalized definitions of well-being that differ from conventional advice. For them, mental peace may come from flexibility rather than order. The unmade bed becomes part of a lifestyle that prioritizes emotional balance. Ultimately, the psychology behind hating to make the bed is complex and deeply personal. It often reflects emotional needs, coping strategies, and individual definitions of comfort rather than a simple disregard for cleanliness or discipline. For many people, hating to make the bed is closely tied to how they define themselves in relation to society. Small daily habits often carry symbolic meaning, and rejecting them can become a way to express individuality. An unmade bed may quietly signal that a person does not measure their worth by conventional standards of order or productivity. Social norms around cleanliness are deeply ingrained and often moralized. A made bed is frequently associated with discipline, responsibility, and success. People who reject this habit may be consciously or unconsciously questioning why such values are universally accepted and whether they truly reflect character or integrity. This resistance often appears in individuals who think critically about tradition. They may ask why certain behaviors are praised simply because they are common. Making the bed can feel like a ritual passed down without clear purpose, and refusing it becomes an act of intellectual independence. Some people view social expectations as performative rather than meaningful. A neatly made bed is rarely seen by others, yet it is treated as a marker of virtue. For those who value substance over appearance, this contradiction can make the task feel hollow and unnecessary. Identity also plays a role in how people relate to order. Individuals who see themselves as unconventional, rebellious, or nonconformist may reject habits that symbolize conformity. The unmade bed becomes a subtle extension of a broader lifestyle choice rather than an isolated behavior. There is also an ethical dimension for some people. They may associate constant self-discipline with a culture that prioritizes productivity over humanity. By refusing to make the bed, they symbolically step away from the idea that every moment must be optimized or controlled. For others, this behavior reflects a preference for internal values over external validation. They may feel no need to prove responsibility through visible signs of order. Their sense of self-worth comes from personal ethics, relationships, or creativity rather than tidy spaces. Cultural background can further influence this perspective. In some environments, strict order is linked to authority and hierarchy. Rejecting small rules like bed making can therefore represent resistance to systems that once felt restrictive or dehumanizing. Over time, these choices help reinforce identity. Each morning decision, however small, becomes part of a narrative about who the person is and what they stand for. The unmade bed fits naturally into a self-image centered on autonomy, reflection, and personal meaning. In this light, hating to make the bed is not a flaw or oversight. It is often a quiet philosophical stance, expressing values related to freedom, authenticity, and a refusal to let inherited norms dictate personal identity.